The exploration team descended from the horizon in a small shuttle, their boots pressing against the rusty red soil of Kepler 442b. Commander Edward stood at the front, his weathered face showing years of space travel. Behind him, Dr. Helen checked her scanning equipment one more time. They were here to search for water sources and mineral deposits, nothing more. Neither of them expected to find something that would change everything. The cave entrance yawned before them like a dark mouth. Strange blue light came from deep inside, flickering like breathing. Edward raised his hand and the team moved forward carefully. Their suit lights cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in glowing fungi that pulsed with soft, ethereal light. The temperature inside was warm, almost comfortable. Stones crunched under their feet as they walked deeper and deeper into the earth. Then they saw her. The creature was enormous, easily 20 meters long, with scales that shimmered between deep purple and silver. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each breath like wine through a broken window. She lay coiled on the cave floor, her massive body trembling slightly. Around her, 3 smaller creatures huddled close, babies no more than 2 meters in length. Their scales were still soft-looking, iridescent blue mixed with hints of green. Their large, intelligent eyes tracked every movement the humans made, filled with terror and something else. Something that looked like desperate hope. Edward stopped walking. He held up his hand, signaling the team to halt. His heart pounded in his chest. These were not the simple life forms they expected to find. These were not animals acting on pure instinct. He could see intelligence burning in those eyes. He could see awareness and fear and love as the babies pressed against their mother. The smallest baby dragon made a sound. It was soft and musical, like wind chimes, but underneath it carried a weight of meaning that transcended species. The translation device in Edward's suit flickered and crackled, struggling to process the sound. Then, slowly, words formed in English. "Please," the baby whispered, its voice trembling with emotion. "Please don't hurt us. Mommy is dying." The words hit Edward like a physical blow. He could hear the desperation, the raw fear, and the love behind them. This baby was not just an animal. This baby was a child, terrified and protecting its mother. Helen gasped beside him, her hands covering her mouth. I'm recording this," she said softly. "Edward, do you hear what I'm hearing?" Edward stepped forward very slowly, keeping his movements gentle and predictable. He removed his helmet carefully, exposing his human face. The babies tensed, but the smallest one tilted its head, watching. Edward knelt down on one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. "We're not here to hurt anyone," Edward said gently. His voice carried across the cave, echoing slightly off the stone walls. "My name is Edward. We're explorers. We came to this world to learn. But we found something more important than we expected. We found people who need help." Dr. Helen moved beside Edward and slowly knelt as well. She was holding a small medical scanner, but she lowered it to show the dragons she wasn't a threat. Her voice was soft and kind, like a lullaby. "What happened to your mother?" Helen asked. "Can you tell us?" The smallest baby looked up at her mother, then back at Helen. The other 2 babies huddled closer together, their small bodies shaking. The largest baby spoke, its voice stronger than the smallest one's but still carrying fear. "The hunters," it said. "They came from the stars. They hunted us across 3 different worlds. Mommy fought them so we could escape. She was hurt very badly. She has been getting weaker and weaker every day. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to help her. We thought we would die here in this cave." Edward looked at the mother dragon more closely. He could see the wounds now, scars across her body, some of them still looking fresh and painful. Her breathing was definitely wrong, too shallow, too weak. There were dark stains on some of her scales that might have been dried blood. She was in serious trouble. "We have a ship," Edward said. "We have doctors and medicine. We can help your mother. But you have to trust us. Will you let us help?" The 3 babies exchanged looks. Their mother opened her eyes slightly, fixing them on Edward with an intensity that made him feel seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in his life. She was intelligent, this massive creature. She was suffering and afraid, but she was also making a choice. She was choosing to trust these humans because she had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "Help her," the smallest baby pleaded. "Please help her." Edward made a decision right then, standing in that cave with 3 baby dragons and their dying mother. He would help them. He would do whatever it took. Earth Command could say what they wanted, but these beings were people. They had families. They had love. They had consciousness and dignity and the right to live. He tapped his comm unit. "Transport team, we need a medical evacuation platform down here immediately. Gentle handling." This is a priority 1 emergency. Understood, Commander, the voice crackled back. Edward turned back to the dragons. Your mother is going to be okay. My friend Helen is a doctor. She has helped so many people. She will help your mother too. And you will be safe. I promise you, as long as I'm alive, nothing will hurt you. The babies watched as the humans worked carefully, moving their mother onto the transport platform with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature. Helen checked her vitals, muttering to herself about what medical supplies they would need. As they lifted the mother dragon, the 3 babies stayed close, their little eyes never leaving her. For the first time since fleeing the hunters, the baby dragons felt something other than terror and despair. They felt hope growing inside them like a small light in the darkness. The medical bay of the horizon was a place of controlled chaos. Machines beeped and hummed around the massive form of Kes, the mother dragon. Her body took up nearly the entire examination table, her scales catching the harsh white light of the medical equipment. Tubes ran from her body to machines that monitored her heartbeat, her breathing, her blood oxygen levels. Everything was wrong with her biology compared to what the doctors expected from a human patient. Dr. Robert stood over a microscope, studying a sample of Kes's blood. His face was tense, worried. He had been a xenochemist for 15 years, studying the biology of alien creatures, but nothing had prepared him for this. The cells in Kes's blood were unlike anything in the medical database. They were beautiful and complex and completely foreign. We don't have any reference point, Robert said to Helen, who was reviewing scan images on a large screen. The images showed Kes's internal organs, but they looked nothing like human organs. There were structures they couldn't even identify. How are we supposed to treat something when we don't even understand what we're treating? Helen didn't take her eyes off the screen. She looked exhausted already, and it had only been 6 hours since they brought Kes aboard. We figure it out. We have to. She's dying and those babies need their mother. In the observation room next door, the 3 baby dragons pressed their faces against the thick glass window. Mir, the largest baby, had his small claws pressed against the glass. Zal stood beside him, silent and still, watching every movement in the medical bay. Little Pix sat on the floor, her small body curled up tight, tears streaming down her blue scales. Nurse Emma sat with Pix, her hand resting gently on the baby dragon's back. Emma had been a nurse for 8 years, trained to comfort human patients, but this was different. This was a terrified child who couldn't speak in Emma's language, only making soft, mournful sounds that broke Emma's heart. Your mommy is going to be okay, Emma whispered, even though she wasn't sure it was true. The doctors are very smart. They're going to fix her. Over the next few days, the medical team worked without rest. Dr. Owen, the surgeon, studied every scan, every test result, trying to understand Kes's physiology. He would stand for hours just looking at the images, trying to find patterns that made sense. Meanwhile, Robert ran tests on her blood, her saliva, her scales. Emma checked Kes's vital signs every 2 hours, updating the machines, adjusting medications that the doctors could only guess at. The babies never left the observation window. Emma brought them food, but they barely ate. They just watched their mother lie motionless on the table, watched the tubes and machines keeping her alive. Pix would press her forehead against the glass, as if she could somehow send her love through the barrier to help her mother heal. But Kes was getting worse, not better. On the 4th day, her breathing became more labored. The machine started alarming constantly. Robert and Owen stood over her body, looking at each other with expressions of defeat. Nothing they were doing was working. The internal bleeding that had seemed to stop was starting again. Her heart was beating irregularly. She was septic, her body attacking itself from the inside. We're losing her, Robert said quietly. Emma heard the words through the intercom and immediately moved to shield the babies, but it was too late. Pix let out a sound, a long, mournful wail that echoed through the ship's corridors. The other 2 babies pressed harder against the glass, their small bodies shaking with sobs. Then Helen made a decision. She called Robert and Owen into a small office off the medical bay and closed the door. She had been researching all night, looking at everything in their medical database, comparing Kes's physiology to every known creature species. She had found something unusual, a combination of drugs that might work. It was theoretical, untested, and incredibly risky. If we do this and it fails, we could kill her, Robert said, reading over Helen's notes. If we don't do something, she dies anyway, Helen replied. At least this gives her a chance. Owen was already calculating dosages. The ratio would be approximately this much of the enzyme inhibitor mixed with this much of the cellular regenerator. We'll have to synthesize it. It'll take hours. We don't have hours, Helen said. We have maybe 12. After that, the sepsis will be irreversible. The three doctors worked frantically in the laboratory, mixing and measuring, checking and rechecking their calculations. Emma stayed in the observation room with the babies, holding them close. She didn't speak, just let them huddle against her, let them cry, let them grieve what they thought they were about to lose. When the medication was ready, Helen entered the medical bay alone. She looked at Kessa's massive face, at the intelligence still flickering behind those eyes despite the pain and weakness. Helen placed her hand gently on Kessa's scaled forehead. "We're going to try something," Helen whispered. "It might work, it might not. But you deserve the chance to see your babies grow up." The injection was administered slowly into Kessa's system. Everyone waited. The machines continued their beeping. Minutes passed like hours. Then, impossibly, Kessa's breathing changed. It became stronger, deeper. Her heart rate stabilized. The fever that had been climbing for days began to drop. In the observation room, the babies felt it before they could see it. Their mother was coming back to them. Pix let out a cry of joy, pressing her entire body against the glass. Mir and Zal danced in their small space, their fear transforming into desperate hope. Helen stood at Kessa's side, tears streaming down her face, unable to believe what she was seeing. The dragon was going to live. Against impossible odds, with nothing but determination and love and refusal to give up, Kess was going to survive. "She's going to be okay," Helen said into her calm. "Tell the babies. Their mother is going to be okay." 3 months had passed since Kess arrived on the horizon. The dying dragon had transformed into a symbol of hope for the entire crew. Her scales had regained their shine, their vibrant purple and silver colors returning day by day. She could walk now, moving carefully through the corridors of the ship with Helen always nearby, watching to make sure she didn't strain herself too much. The babies had grown noticeably larger, their small 2-meter frames now stretching to 3.5 meters. The transformation extended beyond Kessa's physical health. The entire crew had changed. Engineer Tom spent his free time playing games with Mir, teaching the young dragon how to understand human chess. They would sit together in the common area, Tom explaining the movement of pieces while Mir watched intently, his blue eyes tracking every move. Nurse Emma had become something like a big sister to little Pix. She braided the baby dragon's scales with colorful threads, something that made Pix make sounds that could only be described as laughter. Even Captain William, who was known for his stern demeanor and military discipline, had been caught more than once sitting quietly with Zal, just talking about life and philosophy and what it meant to be family. Kess spent most of her time in the observation deck, a large chamber near the front of the ship where she could look out at the stars. She would stand there for hours, her massive body silhouetted against the darkness of space. Helen often found her there and they would talk. Kess would tell her stories of her world before the hunters came, of vast oceans and mountains that touched the clouds, of a civilization that had existed for thousands of years. Helen would listen, understanding that Kess was healing not just physically but emotionally, processing the trauma of what she had survived. The babies would often join their mother at the observation deck. They would press their faces to the glass, marveling at the beauty of the cosmos, pointing out constellations and wondering aloud about distant worlds they might one day visit. There was a peace aboard the horizon, a sense that somehow, against all odds, something right was happening. Humans and dragons were learning to live together, to trust each other, to become something more than just two separate species sharing space. Then the alarms began. The sound was sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet of the ship like a knife through fabric. Red lights flooded the corridors. Commander Edward was on the bridge immediately, his years of military training kicking in automatically. Around him, crew members rushed to their stations, fingers flying across holographic displays, voices calling out information in clipped, efficient tones. "We have a contact, sir," Lieutenant David called out, his voice steady despite the urgency. "Large vessel coming in fast from the outer system. They're not responding to hails." On the main screen, a massive shape appeared against the black of space. The ship was enormous, at least 3 times the size of the horizon. Its hull was jagged and dangerous looking, studded with what appeared to be weapons. It was unlike any human vessel Edward had ever seen. Unlike any design in the entire human database. "Red alert," Edward commanded. "Get those shields up. And get Kess and the babies to the secured section of the ship. Now." Emma was in the observation deck with little Pix when the alarm started. The baby dragon's eyes went wide with terror, and Emma felt her own heart beginning to race. She scooped up Pix, who was not so small anymore, and ran through the corridors toward the medical bay where Kess was being kept. The massive mother dragon was already moving toward them, her maternal instinct overriding any weakness still lingering in her body. Mir and Zhao ran behind their mother, their young eyes filled with the same fear they had known before, the fear they thought they had escaped. "It's okay," Emma said breathlessly as she reached them. "You're safe. We're going to a secure location." But Kes knew. Deep in her bones, in her DNA, she recognized the pattern of that ship. She recognized the energy signature of those weapons. The hunters. They had found her. On the bridge, the communication system crackled to life. A voice emerged from the speakers, harsh, mechanical, filled with an alien accent that made the words sound wrong in human ears. "This is the hunting vessel Kalrax. You are harboring a fugitive of the Outer Galaxy Accord. Release the dragon specimen immediately, or we will destroy your vessel and take what we want from the wreckage." Edward's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. He could feel every crew member on the bridge looking at him, waiting for his command, waiting to see what he would do. The logical choice was clear. Surrender the dragon. Save the ship. Follow the protocols. But Edward looked at the image of Kes and her babies huddled together in the secure section, their eyes filled with terror and trust in equal measure. "We are not surrendering anyone," Edward said, his voice cold and determined. "These beings are under our protection. They are intelligent, sapient life forms. They are people. And we do not negotiate with species that hunt sentient beings." "Commander," David said urgently, "their weapons are charging. They're targeting our main reactor." The Kalrax moved closer, its massive bulk eclipsing the stars around it. The ship was preparing to fire. The crew of the Horizon braced for impact. In the secured section, Kes pulled her babies close, wondering if this would be the end, if they had survived so much only to die anyway. But this time there was a difference. This time they were not alone. This time they had humans who had chosen to stand beside them. This time they had a family who would fight for them. Commander Edward leaned forward in his chair and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. "All hands, battle stations. We are defending our family." The bridge of the Horizon erupted into controlled motion. Every crew member moved with purpose, executing commands that had been drilled into them countless times but had never before felt so real, so urgent, so important. The ship's weapon systems came online with a low hum that vibrated through the floor. The shields blazed into existence, a shimmering barrier of energy that wrapped around the vessel like a protective blanket. "Evasive pattern Delta," Edward commanded, his voice steady and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Helm, get us into that asteroid field at bearing 230. Full impulse." The Horizon banked sharply, throwing everyone slightly off balance as the inertial dampeners worked overtime to compensate. Through the view screen, the massive hunting vessel Kalrax fired its first volley. Brilliant energy bolts streaked across space, but the Horizon was already moving. The shots missed by mere meters, close enough that the crew could feel the electromagnetic discharge through the hull. "They're following us into the asteroid field," Lieutenant David reported, his fingers dancing across the tactical display. "Their vessel is larger, but we have better maneuverability." Engineer Tom was down in the engine room, sweat dripping down his face as he monitored the reactor output. Around him, screens showed power distribution to every system on the ship. Tom pushed the engines to their limits, feeling the ship respond beneath his hands like a living thing. He thought of Mir, of the young dragon's curious questions about how the ship moved, about how humanity had learned to sail among the stars. "Come on, baby," Tom whispered to the ship. "Don't let me down now." In the secured section, Kes stood protective over her babies. The room shook as weapons fire rocked the ship. Pix whimpered, pressing close to her mother's side. Mir tried to be brave, his young shoulders squared, his small claws clenching. Zal simply watched the door as if expecting the hunters to burst through at any moment. Helen stood with them, one hand resting on Kes's neck. She had chosen to be here with the dragons rather than stay in the medical bay. If this was going to end badly, she wanted to end it here alongside the family she had helped save. "They won't get to you," Helen said firmly. "Edward won't let them. Edward never backs down." On the bridge, Edward was executing a plan that conventional military tactics would have called insane. Instead of running away from the asteroid field, he was diving deeper into it. The Kalrax followed, its pilot confident in superior firepower, not understanding the game being played. "Navigation, plot a course through the asteroid field that would be impossible for a vessel that size to follow," Edward said. "Show me the tightest passages you can find." David's fingers flew across the holographic display. "There's a passage here, sir. It's tight. Very tight. We can make it, but barely." "That's the one," Edward said. "Lock it in." full speed. The horizon dove deeper into the asteroid field, weaving between massive chunks of rock floating silently in space. The pilot, a woman named Jennifer with nerves of steel, guided the ship through passages that seemed impossibly narrow. The asteroids whizzed past the view screen so close that the crew could almost reach out and touch them. Behind them, the Kalrax followed, its massive bulk shaking the surrounding asteroids loose with each explosion of its weapons fire. Then the hunters made their mistake. They fired a massive volley of energy weapons, trying to destroy the horizon regardless of the asteroid field around them. The energy blasts scattered, ricocheting off the rocks, and several of them came back toward the Kalrax itself. The hunters' own firepower became their enemy, reflecting off asteroids and striking their own vessel. "Their shields are down," David shouted. "They're venting atmosphere from the port side." Edward seized the moment. All weapons systems concentrated fire on their main reactor. Now, the horizon unleashed everything it had. Energy bolts streaked through space, no longer deflected by the hunters' shields. They struck true, hitting the massive vessel directly. Secondary explosions rippled across the Kalrax's hull. But Edward wasn't finished. He was doing something more than just defending. He was sending a message. "Broadcast this across all frequencies," Edward said to the communications officer, a man named Peter. "All species in this system and beyond hear this. We are humanity and we protect those who seek sanctuary with us. We are not conquerors. We are not raiders. We are defenders of the innocent." The horizon continued to maneuver, continued to fight, but not with mindless aggression. Edward was herding the damaged Kalrax away from the asteroid field, creating a corridor of space that led directly away from his ship, away from the dragons. He was giving them an escape route, telling them clearly, "Leave and you live. Stay and you lose." The hunters understood the message. The Kalrax fired its main engines, damaged but still functional. The massive vessel began to retreat, limping away through space, its weapons offline, its pride shattered. In the secured section, the babies felt the moment shift. The shaking stopped. The alarms quieted. Kes opened her eyes, which had been squeezed shut against the fear. Helen was already moving, checking the status displays. "We won," she said, her voice filled with wonder and relief. "Edward did it. We won." Kes moved toward the observation window and looked out at the retreating hunting vessel. She turned back to Helen, and the dragon's expression was one of profound understanding. "You chose us," Kes said simply. "When you could have sent us away, when you could have surrendered to save yourselves, you chose us." Helen nodded, tears flowing freely down her face. "Your family. That's what family does. They choose each other no matter what." On the bridge, Edward watched the Kalrax disappear into the darkness of space. Around the ship, asteroids floated peacefully once more. The immediate danger had passed, but something larger had just begun. The galaxy was going to hear about this day. They were going to hear about the humans who chose compassion over profit, who chose to defend the defenseless, who chose to stand against impossible odds for people they barely knew. They were going to hear that humanity was worth respecting. 6 months had passed since the Kalrax retreated into the darkness of space. The horizon had become something more than a ship. It had become a home, a beacon of hope, a symbol of what two different species could achieve when they chose cooperation over conflict. Kes had fully recovered, her massive frame now sleek and powerful, her scales shimmering with health and vitality. She moved through the corridors of the ship with confidence, no longer the dying mother gasping for breath in a dark cave, but a living testament to the power of compassion. The babies had grown dramatically. Mir was now almost 4 meters long, his body developing the muscular strength of a young adult dragon. He spent his days studying human engineering with Tom, learning how the ship's systems worked, understanding the mechanics of space travel. There was talk of Tom teaching him how to pilot small shuttles. Zal had discovered a love for human literature, spending hours in the ship's library, his eyes scanning through stories of ancient Earth, of human struggles and triumphs. Little Pix, not so little anymore, had become Emma's constant companion. The bond between them was so strong that sometimes it was hard to remember they were different species. They held hands, or rather, Pix would wrap her small claws gently around Emma's fingers, and they would walk together through the ship like sisters. But the most remarkable change had occurred within Kes herself. She had laid eggs. The news had traveled through the crew like wildfire. The dragon nursery had been specially prepared in a secure section of the ship, temperature-controlled, protected, perfect. 7 eggs lay there, each one the size of a small boulder, their shells glowing faintly with internal luminescence. Kes sat watch over them constantly, her massive body curled protectively around her nest. Helen and Emma had helped prepare everything, consulting with Kes about what the eggs needed, what temperature would be best, what kind of incubation period to expect. In 2 months they will hatch, Kes had told them. My 7 children will know a galaxy where humans and dragons live as one. They will not know fear of the hunters. They will know only safety and family. News of what had happened aboard the Horizon had spread rapidly through the galaxy. The message that Edward had broadcast during the battle had been picked up by thousands of ships, transmitted through hundreds of stations. Human ships no longer faced the same suspicion and hostility from other species. Instead, they were approached with curiosity and respect. Humans had proven themselves to be protectors, allies, beings worthy of trust. Other species began reaching out. The Kellen Collective sent a diplomatic vessel to open trade discussions. The ancient Kthara sent a message expressing interest in human philosophy. Even species that had previously ignored humanity or treated them as minor players in galactic politics now wanted to know more. All because of one ship and its crew who had chosen to save 3 baby dragons and their dying mother. But on the Horizon itself, the focus was on something more personal, more intimate. The eggs were beginning to show signs of hatching. Small cracks appeared in the shells. Soft chirping sounds came from within, little voices calling out to the mother waiting above them. Kes lay in the nursery with her original 3 babies beside her. Mir pressed his head against his mother's neck. Zal sat quietly, reading excerpts from the ship's library to the unhatched eggs, believing that hearing human language would help them learn faster. Pix danced around excitedly, unable to contain her joy at the coming of her new siblings. In the observation deck, Edward stood with Helen watching the stars. They had received an official message from Earth Command 3 days ago. The message had been simple and direct. They were not disciplined for their actions. Instead, they were being promoted. Edward was being offered a command of a larger fleet, a position of significant authority. Helen was being offered a position in the new Department of Interspecies Relations, a position that didn't even exist before but was being created specifically for her. Are you going to take it? Helen asked quietly. Edward was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. I'm staying here. This is where I belong. This is where the real work is happening. Helen nodded. She had expected that answer. I'm staying too. Someone needs to make sure Kes and the babies get the best medical care. They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 humans who had changed the galaxy by choosing to be kind, by choosing to help, by choosing to see the person in the creature that others would have simply exploited or destroyed. The hatching began on a Tuesday morning. Soft cracking sounds echoed through the ship. One by one the eggs began to break open. The first hatchling emerged, a tiny dragon no more than half a meter long, its scales still damp and glistening. It made a sound, a soft cry, and its mother answered with a rumbling purr of love and recognition. The crew gathered in the observation areas, watching through reinforced glass as 7 new dragons came into the world. Each one was unique, their scales displaying different patterns and colors. One had scales that shimmered like gold. Another was deep blue with silver streaks. One was pale lavender, almost translucent in appearance. They were beautiful and perfect and alive. Emma stood with Pix watching the new hatchlings. They're going to grow up knowing humans, Pix said softly. They'll never know fear of us. They'll know us as family from their first moment of consciousness. That's right, Emma said, squeezing Pix's clawed hand gently. And that's going to change everything. Word spread quickly through the galaxy again. 7 new dragons, born aboard a human ship, the first generation of a new era. The first generation that would grow up knowing humans not as threats or resources, but as friends, as protectors, as family. On worlds across the galaxy this news sparked hope. If humans and dragons could become family, what other impossible things might become possible? What other ancient conflicts might be resolved? What other bridges might be built? Commander Edward stood in the nursery, watching Kes with her new hatchlings and her 3 older children all gathered around her. The small dragons were learning to walk, stumbling on legs that didn't quite work yet. Mir was helping them, showing them how to move, how to exist in a world of gravity and space and love. Kes looked up at Edward and spoke words that she had repeated many times before, but that never lost their power to move him. You saved us. You chose compassion when you could have chosen profit. You stood against impossible odds because it was right. The galaxy will never forget what humanity did here. Edward knelt down so his eyes were level with Kes's. We're family, he said simply. That's all family does. And in that moment, aboard a small human ship floating in the vast darkness of space, A new alliance was born. Not through treaties or negotiations but through love, through choice, through the simple decision that compassion was stronger than fear, and that family was worth protecting at any cost.